Welcome to Show Money, the only show exclusively dedicated to the business of mixed martial arts. I'm Paul Gift, the economist, and with me as always are Jason Cruz, our lawyer, and John Nash, the man who knows everyone and everything in MMA. You can find Jason at MMA Payout and John and I right here at Bloody Elbow. Today we're going to start with our thoughts on the George St. Pierre contract dispute with the UFC and weave that into a discussion of the first few months of William Morris's UFC ownership. And we'll close with some thoughts on the mess that seems to be the World Series of Fighting. So last week, George St. Pierre came out and declared that he was a free agent. The UFC basically responded, no, you're not. Jason, you're the lawyer here. What are GSP's legal options?
Well, basically, from what we know, he's hired Jim Quinn of Wheel Gottschalk's manages a big law firm out of New York. And essentially what's transpired is they are claiming that the UFC has breached GSP's 2011 contract by not offering him a fight. Essentially, the key phrase, which I think is going to be bandied about and disputed here, is whether or not a bout agreement was given to GSP, which would necessitate the actual breach. UFC, of course, in their statement contends that he's still a fully contracted fighter. Obviously, Jim Quinn is no slouch. They definitely believe that they have a legal argument here for a breach of contract. Interesting enough, there's several options, obviously. The one, of course, is perhaps this is legal posturing to facilitate a new deal for GSP, which would mean more money, more options for him, things of that nature. Or it could mean that the parties go to a lawsuit filed, which would probably mean that the UFC would request an injunction from preventing from GSP from being a free agent. Whether or not that happens will be an interesting case. I think it's similar, not the same, as the Rampage Jackson deal, where he claimed that Bellator breached his contract and therefore he could go to the UFC. We have some different facts here, but essentially we have issues related to whether or not there was a breach of contract. Obviously, there's some other factors thrown in here. We could discuss there. Since GSP last fought in 2013, we had the Reebok deal, which whether or not he signed an addendum to agree to that, and also the USADA UFC anti-doping deal policy. There was an addendum to that, which I believe the fighters had to sign. But we could kind of talk about that as well. So what are your thoughts on GSP's options, John?
I mean, I guess it depends how serious they are.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, my guess is he's doing this just for the publicity, for public relations, that this is a move to somewhat embarrass the UFC to grant him a new contract. There was some talk that he wanted a $10 million offer that he shot down. And I know from some sources that the offer, they weren't asking for $10 million, GSP and his people, but they were asking for a large sum of money to offset the previous contract that gave him his own sponsors. That amount of money would probably equal 10 million if it was a big, usual, 1 million type pay-per-view seller. But it was the guarantees were much lower than 10 million. But so it sounds like he's trying to get the UFC to comply and grant him a new contract, and basically giving them a threat that if you don't, I have other options. The next step is if the UFC doesn't give him a new contract, does he file? My guess is I don't think he would have gone this far if he didn't have a plan to file. And I think the next step, if the UFC doesn't give him a new contract, which they very well might, is that you'll see a lawsuit filed in Nevada, because that's where he has to do it. And then it gets more serious. So that's his options right now. I guess we'll see how serious he is if they end up filing, or if the UFC takes him so serious, they offer him a new contract.
Jason, let me ask you really quick. Do you think it's better for GSP in terms of strategy to preemptively sue the UFC or wait for them to sue him? Maybe we don't believe he's going to sign a deal with another promotion, but maybe do something where they have to sue him.
Well, I think if he does sign a deal with a new promotion, obviously the UFC is going to file suit. But it's interesting because I believe it was the ESPN article talked about how Jim Quinn, GSP's attorney, gave a 10-day deadline for the UFC to comply with some sort of fight agreement. Seems like an artificial deadline to me, unless there was something in the contract that provided that some sort of relief like that.
However, sorry to interrupt. There is a 10-day in the contract. They have 10 days to oh,
okay, there you go.
Whenever there's a disagreement on the contract, they have 10 days to remedy it. That's what's according to the contract.
So there you go. And obviously, it sounded like the UFC complied with it on the last day with some sort of thing that was not acceptable to GSP's legal team. But in terms of whether or not they are going to be the first to file, I assume so. I think though with these types of cases, one thing as counsel is to let GSP know you're going to have a counterclaim. What that means is, if you sue the UFC for a breach of contract and what would be a declaratory judgment stating that you're a free agent, it's basically the court saying, yeah, the contract is null and void. You're a free agent now. You shall expect the UFC to file suit saying that you have breached the contract, George St. Pierre, because I'm sure that the UFC will contend that no, he's still a contracted fighter under the terms of the contract. What will be the interesting issue here is whether or not the UFC will want to litigate the terms of the contract. Obviously, Jim Quinn's come out basically saying, this is a 1940s type of contract. These types of clauses are ancient and should be stricken. So what that could mean for future their future contracts could be an interesting perspective that they might want to consider.
Right, and there was a question to me. Go ahead, John.
Oh, I was just going to say that's why I think that's GSP's plan and his team is they think the UFC will cave in because the UFC does not want to go the route of actually having these contracts tried out. I mean, to go to trial and have a decision on them if they're all the provisions in them are legal or not. To them, it's the tool of the lawsuit and the contracts is basically the threat of having to sit in court and pay for it for 6 months to a year for most fighters. Well, for GSP, that's not a problem. He's retired and he has money. So I think that's what they're kind of counting on is the UFC to cave in. I also don't think they're going to sign with like Bellator or Rise. And first of all, I don't think GSP would sign with another promotion. Why wouldn't he just promote his own event and keep all the money, and co-promote maybe with another promotion if he wanted to go that route. But I don't think they're going to go ahead and sign with another promotion like Rampage did with Bellator and then file an injunction because, correct me if I'm wrong, if that happens, then the UFC could ask for a bond be placed on GSP for damages, and that bond would total millions for someone like GSP.
It could. It would depend on what the bond would be. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think if they're going to go the lawsuit route, they're going to settle his contract first before they start planning on any events with GSP. But I think they're counting on the UFC to cave in because they don't want to see that case go to trial.
But we do.
Oh, we do. We definitely do.
All right. So, how much of a role do you guys think you've been hearing a lot about Reebok and Under Armour? What role do you guys think that issue is playing here? In the sense that in other sports, right? In other sports, you can have teams that are sponsored by Nike, yet someone is endorsed by Adidas on the side. And it seems to work there. What role do you think Under Armour and Reebok are playing in this dispute?
I think it plays a part. I mean, I don't think it's as big as people think. I think it plays a part in the sense that from my understanding, the UFC has sponsored deals with their major sponsors that they actually give to the fighters, that they parcel out to fighters. And these sponsor deals are much smaller than the deals that fighters used to get on their own. So George St. Pierre actually has a very large, maybe 7-figure Under Armour deal, and that would take a hit if he went in the cage and couldn't wear it. I mean, he doesn't have to wear Reebok. They could probably give him some blank uniform to wear and not have Reebok, so he's not violating his Under Armour deal. But my thinking is it's not just that and the finances, it's the idea that he actually just wants more money. He thinks he's worth more money, and he sees these changes, and this gives him an opportunity to ask for more money because you have to do something to satisfy my previous contract that's now been changed. I think a bigger thing is the rivalry between William Morris and CAA. I think that plays a bigger part, actually. But
exactly.
Yeah, but the Under Armour, I mean, that might be the spark that started Under Armour and Reebok, but I don't think that's the major friction. I don't know. What do you think, Jason? You think I'm way off here, or what?
No, I think that I do think Under Armour has a little part to play in it, because GSP was being compensated for wearing Under Armour, and now that he cannot, that kind of sheds that's a revenue stream that's cut off from GSP. And I'm not sure what his sponsorship contract with Under Armour would be, if whether or not he can wear Reebok clothing. I'm not sure what those terms would be. It seems like Paul alluded to, in the NFL, they have I forget, is it Reebok now is the sponsor now, but people are wearing Under Armour cleats or Adidas cleats, and that you could get around that, but of course they have other agreements to that, but I'm not sure how this would play out for GSP. Obviously that would be something that comes into play when he thinks about his overall pay.
Yeah, and we don't know how how his Under Armour deal is structured. If he gets what he's getting out of the cage now, what he would get based on going back in the cage. I mean, can he wear Reebok in the cage but yet have Under Armour out of the cage? In other sports that happens, but in other sports, the Nike logo on a basketball jersey isn't that prominent. I mean, and you still get to wear your own shoes. So when you walk in the UFC cage, it's pretty obvious that you're wearing Reebok. So maybe they're not as amenable to it. But so we don't know exactly the details of his contract and how it would be affecting him financially. Yeah, but it feels like he's using this opportunity to try to get more money. And just to clarify for everyone, John, GSP is with CAA, not William Morris, correct?
Yes, he's a CAA client. William Morris owns the UFC now. William Morris represents Chris Weidman, I think they represent, but also Ronda Rousey. So there's some weird friction there probably, because CAA and William Morris are very famous rivals in Hollywood, bitter rivals, just like each other immensely. So
you never know what effect that's having on these negotiations. If GSP was a William Morris client, do you think this would be happening right now?
No, because he'd have a deal with William Morris's other client, their partner in Reebok, probably. Kind of like what Ronda Rousey has. She has a Reebok deal. She has a monster deal. It's amazing how Ronda Rousey has contracts with all the sponsors of the UFC that William Morris now owns.
And there we go. And that brings us into William Morris, right?
Yeah.
Back in July, they bought out the UFC, combination of equity, combination of debt, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but for $4 billion. And all of a sudden, we've been seeing some changes, right? We've been seeing GSP saying that the negotiation was going fine until WME purchased the UFC. We've been seeing layoffs. They didn't just happen recently; they've been happening. If you've heard from other people at the UFC, they've already been happening. But I guess there was a big round earlier this week. The layoffs that were coming, and it took out some pretty big names. What else am I missing with WME now they've taken over?
They have celebrity owners they brought in.
Oh yeah, celebrity owners.
And the big question is how is it going to affect fighter pay, right? A big question is how is it going to affect fighter pay? There's the issue with the Federal Reserve not warning WME, but they were warning Goldman Sachs and the investment banks that arranged the financing for WME about the terms of that financing. So there's a lot to unpack here. But what's been your impression? Let's start with you, John, of WME, and what do you think is the biggest issue so far?
I mean, for one thing, WME is inheriting a lot of problems left over from the previous administration. WME is Zuffa because they bought Zuffa. But we'll call Zuffa the previous owners, the Fertitta brothers. Okay, so Zuffa, they've inherited a lot of problems, and those problems a lot of them are with the fighters and the stuff they inherited an antitrust lawsuit. They inherited disgruntled fighters. And ever since news broke that the UFC was bought for $4.2 billion, you can feel how vocally frustrated the fighters have been, kind of bubbling to the top now. They're now being open about it. And so they've inherited a disgruntled workforce. And on top of that, they've also made pledges, I guess, to the other owners, to the banks, to whatever, that they're going to see very large EBITDA earnings. And so they're trying to increase their EBITDA from what the UFC, EBITDA is your earnings before interest, taxes, interest, depreciation, amortization. So it's basically all your earnings before you take out some of the costs of doing business. It's after your costs of doing business, but before all the other, taxes and like loans and stuff for people that don't know what EBITDA is. So it's their earnings. They have to increase their earnings to make everybody happy. So they are right now cutting a lot of, I guess, dead weight. They think they're bringing in their own people. But on top of that, there's expenses that William Morris brings to the UFC that adds to it. William Morris is collecting a $25 million per year managerial fee for running the UFC. William Morris gets a huge bonus payout if by next summer they get the earnings up to $275 million. They get $175 million bonus. So they basically get all the remaining money after you pay off the interest for the loans that go to the Fertittas. They get all that, and the year after that, they get another big bonus. They hit $350 million. So what this tells me is that the UFC is getting more and more profitable, but there's not going to be much money available for stuff, the luxury of like foreign expansion, fighter pay, definitely fighter pay, and for keeping a large workforce. So we're going to see a strim and almost a cost-cutting UFC making a lot of money. I think that's their plan for the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, and some of those costs are expected. I mean,
yeah,
when a company like WME buys you, you know that they're gonna try to streamline a bunch of things and use the resources that they have. Especially since you would hear some things about UFC inner workings on the back end that wasn't always extremely positive. Not all the time, but sometimes. So that they would want to do that. But the funny thing is, right? Before the purchase, I mean, there was always talk about the UFC being valued at like what $2 or $3 billion anyway, but it's the second that an actual purchase goes through, nobody was really saying, hey, this company is worth $2 billion. I'm not making enough. But the second it actually happens and someone pays $4 billion, everyone's like, holy crap, I'm really not making enough. All of a sudden it becomes this big issue. Whereas when they were just on paper valued at $2 billion or something, it didn't really seem to matter that much. And I don't blame fighters. I would be sitting there saying, "Where's my money?" as well. But all of a sudden, because the UFC has this value, to think that that's going to equate to fighters can make more money now. That's not generally how pay works out. And it's I guess people are going to find that out the hard way.
Yeah, and I do think that it's happening faster than I had thought. I thought that these changes were going to occur gradually over a year's time, and here we are 3 months later, and they have cut the workforce dramatically. We've seen a lot of changes go on internally. It's interesting to me that what had made the UFC such a strong brand was the fact that they kept a lot of things internally, like the production of all their UFC countdowns, and all of those things were done in-house. And it seems as though those people, at least a portion of those people, are going to be gone. Same thing with the international expansion; those things are going to lessen. My theory about that is that they're going to focus more on big shows domestically, because that's where the money will go. You want big? I mean, they've had 3 or 4 big shows this year, all happening in Vegas. And you notice that a lot of these people, most of the pay-per-views are emanating from Vegas now. And because I think that's where they can draw the most money. It's cheaper for them, and probably would drive up, hopefully drive up for the revenue for the new owners.
Yeah, I mean, my thinking is, the weird thing about William Morris taking over, they took over this brand that was supposed to be this global, world-dominating brand. That was what it was sold as. And what William Morris seems to be doing is, for the next 2 years, is a cash grab. They are they're laying people off. That makes sense. You want to cut dead wood or redundant work, or you can do it better. But they're laying off a lot of their foreign expansion teams, the teams that work in foreign countries. And the word is they're only going to do like 35 events next year. They're going to cut back, and they're going to greatly cut back foreign territories. Brazil, supposedly only 3 shows planned for next year. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I heard. Only 3 shows. So they're cutting back their foreign market shows. So it's not the idea of growing the brand and making it bigger. The idea is contracting everything to make it as profitable as heck. And even then, the profits aren't necessary to cover the loan. The profits are being made for the next 2 years, so William Morris can collect those big bonus payments to themselves. And that's sorry, what's up?
No, and there is, I think there is going to be a version of expansion, but it seems like pulling back on the shows. But from what I've heard, from what I understand, William Morris now has a UFC division, and they're brainstorming projects, as many projects as they can think of that have value that would go up. So it seems like the expansion, what you guys are talking about, the contraction of shows, that they have a financial incentive to get the UFC's name out there, to do, like we said, you saw in the Fed warning about the ad backs. It said cost cuts and more licensing, right? So it feels like the expansion is not going to be on the fight side, on the show side, on the event side, but in the trying to make deals side, trying to work deals with their division, trying to get the UFC's name out there, trying to strike deals that way.
What was interesting too about those ad backs, though, that in the next year, those ad backs, remember, according to a Wall Street Journal, $48 million in ad backs were going to come from new licensing and TV deals. So only 48 million in the next year or so are going to come. This is before the new TV deals kick in 2018. So the next year, to only 48 million are going to come in from new opportunities, new deals. That additional 150 million they're shooting for in ad backs apparently is coming from money of expenses they're already paying in the UFC. So I'm curious we know where part of it is. It's coming from the salaries and the pay of a lot of the people they're cutting off and the foreign properties they have for offices. They're saving money there. I don't know how much they're saving, but somehow they plan on getting at least another 100 million out of the UFC, out of the revenue streams they're already getting for the UFC.
Yeah, my sense on it is that correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I don't think anybody knows if I'm wrong, but my sense is that was more on the TV side. But you can also just strike new business, and the Wall Street Journal isn't going to put every possible deal they're trying to work on, right? You've got cost cutting, you've got what you think you're going to get from new TV deals, but then there's all that other new business, all the other little things that you're trying to do. That's my sense. That was my take on it. I don't know. You guys have a different take?
I just thought that a lot of that had to do with their belief that they can strike up a big television contract with respect to when they're up again. So that's pure speculation. In my estimation, is it could be a huge new deal with Fox or maybe ESPN, but it could also be not as big as you thought. I mean, you think back, if everyone was thinking about, the WWE thought it was going to strike it rich with a huge new deal, and they didn't coming up that big. The other thing, though, is maybe with a deal, maybe they're going to parse it out with the digital. Maybe they'll do those types of licensing deals with online stuff. I don't know how much they expect more from Fight Pass, but those are other options too.
I just got to say the new TV deal doesn't kick into 2019. They're expecting close to 300 million in EBITDA next year.
Yeah.
So they're expecting 350 in 2018, the year after. So they're on the current Fox deal. They expect this huge EBITDA, and from ad backs, most of it. So my guess is that there's expenses the UFC had for executives, whatever, that lowered that EBITDA to what it was, and removing that will right there add 50 million or something like that, and then they'll find other ways to add more and more. So I'm sorry, I just don't see a big deal in the pipework next year that can add 100 million out of nowhere.
Here's where it's going to come from. So I just cut the cord and don't have cable anymore. So my pay-per-view buys are going to come directly through UFC Fight Pass.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Instead of getting like $30, they're going to get $60.
Yep.
So that's going to add up.
Yeah, that's
an extra $30 to UFC times how many shows per year? Boom.
Yeah, that's definitely a plan. They've been planning on that for every year. They plan on some 10% growth in that. So that's still, it's not going to offset. You're not going to see us suddenly go from, it doesn't add 50 million in 1 year.
Yeah.
Must,
I think I'm worth 50 million. I was just screwing
Yeah.
around. No, but
Yeah.
but in all honesty, so my wife does these ad backs. She's been VP of finance at 2 different companies for a while now. And every just so people know, in every acquisition, there are ad backs. That's nothing special.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is what's unique is the amount that it grew EBITDA. But when you do ad backs, you have to literally set out and list every single one of them and justify every single one of them and show them to your auditors. And if it's an acquisition and there's debt, you would show them to the investors. So it's not like it's this hidden, it's mysterious to us. We don't know what it is. But people who are really interested in the details and have access are able to look at every single thing that they list. And they're assumptions, and they might not come true, but you put them out there, and people have to sign off on them, and you have to justify them. The Federal Reserve just wants to try to limit exactly how much you're doing it because they feel like getting over leveraged caused a lot of problems in our financial crisis, right? But the ad backs themselves are no big deal. It's the amount that it raised EBITDA was a little bit eye popping.
Yeah, but here's a question: who here would be surprised if 5 years down the line, UFC can't honor its loans, goes bust, and the Fertittas buy it back for pennies on the dollar? They've done it twice, so
I would be surprised.
I would be surprised too. But I'm just saying, it'd be amazing if they pulled that off again. You're like, Jesus, these guys, when are we ever going to learn? But they did it again.
Well, they'll be owning a football team by that time.
Yeah, well, they fold together. I don't know. They might. I guess Adelson is the rumored now the guy going to be owning the football team in Vegas. So another casino guy. But again, we're on a segue from that, since we were talking about the new William Morris, and we're talking about fighters and fighter pay and GSP. That's a big conversation. A lot of fighters are hoping for more money, and there was a lot of optimism, or at least cautious optimism, with the new owners that they would start getting paid more. And based on this, I think, would either of you guess that pay raises are on their way? Paul, you first.
No. There we go.
We need to know.
I mean, look, the driver of pay is always the revenue you generate. You get those rare examples where an owner makes a lot of money and will give, like, what's that one company? I'm trying to remember the name of it, where the owner made a ton of money and ended up giving 20% ownership to his workforce, his or her workforce. I don't remember who it was, and I don't remember the name of the company, but it was like a gift. Just, here you go. All right, that's rare. Other than that, I mean, it reminds me of when people talk about how much money Walmart makes and what they pay their workers. But and we could get into a separate argument on that. But at the end of the day, it's always about your revenue, and it's the revenue they're driving changing. And maybe if this business can grow even more, but I mean, there's no real economic reason why, with the company worth $4 billion now, that's going to move its way to fighters if the actual eyeballs you're driving and revenue you're driving isn't changing. Jason, what about you?
Yeah, I just don't see it. I don't really think that it was feasible, although obviously there's that inkling initial guttural reaction when you see that they'll have new owners, that perhaps that they'll honor their workforce, and other factors like the lawsuit and fighters speaking up, that there would be some sort of at least throwing a bone to fighters. But from the business perspective, you just think about that, I don't think that fighter pay was going to be elevated in any kind of huge respects. I mean, I did think at a certain point that they would go up a little bit just to appease the masses, so to speak. But from what we've seen in the past couple of weeks, I don't know how. I don't think that it's going to be happening anytime soon.
How about you, John? And I should just throw in, I don't think it's going to be flat and stagnate either. I mean, I suspect it'll be the usual increases. The one issue is, again, if this gets fighters fired up so that it helps some of those other movements like PFA or MMAFA or something like that. But John, what do you think?
I mean, it's obviously it's helping the PFA and the MMAFA. I mean, I just talking to people that talk to those guys. It's fighters that would never have talked to them before are now contacting, those guys or fighters involved in it. So on that sense, but I don't see it. Again, I mean, the big mover of any sport pay is competition, and there's just not a lot of competition in MMA right now. So I guess maybe is this going to drive a lot of fighters to go to Bellator? Does Bellator have the resources to absorb a lot of fighters and take advantage of it and start making revenue that can actually compete? That's another question. But the idea that the UFC is going to start paying more because new owners came in, I think that's the exact. I argued before it'd be almost the opposite, because the owners have to make a return on the investment. I mean, the only people are going to be making a lot, it looks like, is William Morris, who are going to make, a couple $100 million in the next couple of years, it looks like. But besides that, I would say most fighters, you're the ones that are still in the UFC, because they cut the number of shows, that means they got to let a lot of fighters go too. So the fighters still in the UFC, they, I guess the usual growth, the usual 15% we've estimated of whatever the revenue is. So if the revenue explodes, maybe they keep that 15%. And if there's more revenue, they'll get paid more. But of course, they could be looking at that increased money, earnings, revenue, and go, hey, that's more money we can add to EBITDA because we need that. So there's always that possibility. In which case, 15% dips. We'll see. That'll, I mean, they're not making a lot, fighters, right now, so that's for sure. So,
and you just never know when a new owner comes in what sort of new rules they're going to put down, right? You still have Joe Silva and Sean Shelby there for right now, and you'll still have Sean Shelby, right, who kind of, and let's assume they're the ones who negotiate pay. Maybe they have to get pay approved, but they'll still be there. But you just never know what are those new owners going to come in, and what pressure are they going to put on them in terms of pay. I mean, if we go off the Entourage movie, it doesn't look good. Ari Gold's a bitch. Not that kind of bitch.
Yeah.
Dealing with him would be a bitch.
Yeah.
He's the devil in that show. So that's the character. He's supposed to be based on that guy, Ari Emanuel. So we'll see. But I mean, like I said, but again, we've had there's risk involved with William Morris too, and I wonder if they're aware of it. That you push too hard, you could get all the fighters onto an association or union. There's the Ali Act floating around. There's the lawsuit. There's GSP potentially suing him, and GSP is an interesting case because I can't think of the last time a major. If he actually does leave the UFC and sues to get out of his contract, I can't think of the last time Randy Couture was it, where an actual kind of like massive needle mover left the UFC, where we could actually see if he leaves the UFC, we could actually see, is it possible for a star to put on their own pay-per-view without the UFC brand? And, I mean, people are going to say, well, he can't do it. He would never make that money outside the UFC. Looking at boxing numbers to get remember his supposed high in the UFC was like $4.5 million, just under $5 million was his high point of pay for the UFC. To get boxing numbers, they would have to sell like 250,000 pay-per-views and get like a $2 million gate. And, I mean, his opponent probably wouldn't make much, but you could cover someone's purse for those kind of numbers. So could he do a $300,000 selling pay-per-view against who's out there though? That's the other question.
Well, what's interesting is we had been talking about that with McGregor, right?
Yeah.
Except now GSP potentially actually has the opportunity to do it. Where we had always said, what if McGregor wants to go do his own thing? What if McGregor wants to do his own thing? Yeah. GSP maybe is like the next best McGregor you could get at this moment for experiment-wise.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing is, who does he fight is the question. I mean, for anybody leaving the UFC, there's just not a lot of names. What do you put on Ben Askren with him?
Yeah,
against him?
That's the only one I was thinking is Ben Askren maybe, but I think that one of the things you'd have to think about is whether or not he would want to go through all of that to promote his own card or something like that. I'm not sure how what the outlay you'd have to do to produce such a thing and get it on with pay-per-view and cable distributors.
Yeah, I mean, in my thinking, he would have
put
to
it online maybe.
Yeah, but I think you'd have to co-promote with like Bellator. You'd need someone with a TV platform to advertise it. Someone that you could team up to market with it. For Bellator, it'd probably be good for them. It'd be no risk because GSP would be handling his end, and they're just they're not in charge of the whole pay-per-view. They're not required. They're not ones guaranteeing his salary. They're just putting up the rest of the pay-per-view. They're the only one I could see doing it because, maybe Ryzen or ONE FC, but they have no American and North American presence, and you need a North American presence to sell pay-per-views, and that's where GSP's a star. So
Yeah.
I would imagine it would have to be some sort of Bellator co-promotion.
Yeah, do it in Canada. I'm sure. I mean, that's where you get your attendance, live attendance, and have a co-promotion. That would be the only one way I would think you could do it.
I mean, that's the one interesting part, is could it be pulled off or not, and we'd have an answer. Can someone do their own pay-per-view or not? If it bombed, then we got our answer. But if it did 300,000-400,000 pay-per-views, you go, well, crap, that's that 300,000 or 400,000 pay-per-views, that generates enough money to pay. Look at Bradley versus JMM. That they had $10 million in purses paid out. They made money on that pay-per-view, and it only sold 375,000. So
the only thing is it won't be GSP today. It'll be GSP in 2 years.
Yeah, well, it depends on how long. 2 years. Yeah, how long? I don't know. I think you could, from talking to lawyers and stuff, something like that could get settled in 6 to 8 months. But still, that's another year of his career. Even because then you have to start. It'd be 6 to 8 months before you even start thinking about a pay-per-view. Then you got to line it up and do it. So it's a long.
How old
I think
is he? 35, 36?
35, and I'm sure he still would rather do it with the UFC, because UFC's there's less headaches. It's a guarantee. There's a risk involved in putting on your own pay-per-view. It could bomb completely. So, there's no guarantee he's going to walk, unless someone's, whispering in his ear and says, we will guarantee you 10 million. I don't see why you'd want to take that gamble.
Right.
So, but it would be interesting. We talked, like I said, we always thought McGregor would be the guy would try something.
So what do you think? So what do you think? GSP fights in the UFC next year? What do you think?
I think he fights. I think he signs a deal. UFC offers him a deal. Maybe not fully what he wants, but a lot better than what he's currently getting. They cave in, and he comes back and fights in the UFC, and he fights Nate Diaz or something, or Robbie Lawler.
Jason, what do you think? Next year?
Yeah. I think that cooler heads will prevail, and that they'll get a deal done. And this is all just what they call saber rattling. And GSP will sign a deal probably sometime in the spring of 2017.
Yeah, I think so as well. I'm not even sure if we're going to see a lawsuit. Who knows? Maybe we will. But yeah,
I don't think we will.
Yeah, it seems like there were
the threats there.
What's that?
I said the threats there. Yeah. There's a possibility we'll see a lawsuit, but I just think the UFC will come around and make him a better offer.
It feels like they were kind of close, and so I think we'll get there. Anything else on the UFC and WME before we transition to World Series of Fighting?
No,
don't think so.
They're going to lay more people off, it sounds like.
I shouldn't laugh about that. That's
I shouldn't either. I'm getting getting resumes in my email for people there. I feel bad for anybody who loses a job.
I mean, it's the hard part of any acquisition, and the people who stay there sometimes you end up leaving voluntarily, right? Because you don't like how the culture has changed and whatnot. So it's just the hard part of any acquisition.
The workers there should just remember, just listen what Dana said, 3-4 months ago. There's no sale. Don't worry about it.
Well, hey, speaking of that, we've got another promoter saying nothing's wrong. The rumors of our demise are overblown. We are canceling our next 2 shows because we want to put on one awesome show for you guys. That promoter is called the World Series of Fighting, who I put out an article about today, and Mike Russell put out something today. I would ask people to go read it if you're interested. And John has done work on this in the past. I have done work on this in the past. They seem to be like I don't know, how would you describe them? What analogy would you give for them in terms of MMA promotion? Analogize them to something. What would you do? I'm putting you on the spot. We didn't think of this in advance.
They're the Washington Senators to the Harlem Globe. Now who's the Globetrotters enemies? The opponents, the Washington Generals. They're the Generals of MMA.
John Nash said that, ladies and gentlemen. There you go.
It just reading through what you guys put, you and Mike Russell, great job, guys. And then the prior stuff from John, it basically seems like it's a bunch of folks that just thought that it would be kind of cool to own a MMA organization, but there was no plan as to how to fund it and how to plan it. And so you got all of these dysfunctional parts, and just reading through the article, you just shake your head and say, how is this possible that these people are doing these types of things? I mean, you do definitely need some sort of diagram to kind of, or flow chart to figure out who is suing who and what are the claims and where's this money. It's really, really difficult. And it's, the Ali stuff is very easy to discern, but like the whole intertwining thing is just ridiculous. I mean, to be honest, I had to read the article twice to figure out what's going on, just because there's so much, ridiculousness going on. The text messages for us. I mean, read Paul's article just for the text messages. I thought those were interesting.
There's actually more in there that I left out. But go ahead. I
mean, what owner of a major company doesn't ask for nudes on a text from someone to send them photos? I do that all the time with my coworkers. Hey, send me a nude. Just normal everyday business stuff, purely professional.
It's not coworkers, it's co-owners. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I do it with everybody that I hire to work for me. I just attach your resume a nude. That's the only way I know. I can trust you that way. But no, I mean, again, that's an allegation. We don't know if that's true. So it is unfair to say that was. But there was a text message attached that made it that at least suggested that's true. There's been stories for years now about how it's no lie. I guess a lot of guys love Ray Sefo. But there's a lot of complaints from fighters that they just feel abused, and all the complaints you used to hear from Bellator and the UFC are even worse with World Series of Fighting, because like they say, they sign on with them, and fighters just don't feel like they get promised stuff, or they even have their contracts in World Series of Fighting just either because they don't care or they just can't do it. They don't honor the agreements, give them the fights they're due. So for the fighter point of view, it's sad. From the promotion point of view, I always had a sense that they jumped in. It's after they made the promotion after Strikeforce got bought out. My idea was always thinking was it felt like these were guys who, some people that knew MMA and were interested, and they convinced other people to put money into it, thinking it was a quick turnaround. That hey, look, Strikeforce made this much money in this short period of time, even though they never blew big. They made a huge profit, actually. We could do the same thing, or that, it's so easy to make it MMA promotion, because there's going to be all this talent floating around because Strikeforce is gone. There's going to be an opening to maybe get on, Showtime, without realizing that there's so many barriers of entry to even get to that place. And now they've realized it's like, well, we've never progressed beyond this, this one step above the regionals, and we've never advanced to kind of a national promotion or international promotion, and it's not going to happen after who knows how many millions upon millions they've spent to get there, or just get where they are, which is a step above the regional level. So I'm not optimistic about their future. I'm sad to say. There's probably some nice people working there, but when you read those reports, it does sound also like they are willfully turning a blind eye to very terrible business practices at the same time. But who am I to say? I screw up on my business all the time. So
you're not the only one.
Yeah, I mean, over sinking $7.5 million in a failed venture. Who doesn't do that?
Well, that's what I was gonna say. It really feels like someone or a few people are just taking a hard lesson right now in sunk costs and like throwing good money after bad. It feels like they're saying to themselves, we've got so much we've already invested, we can't let this go. It'll turn around, like when you buy a stock and it just plummets. Like, it'll come back. I know it.
The gambler's dilemma.
The gambler's dilemma. Yes, I'll win that money back. Don't worry. Just another 100. Another 100 down or something.
Yeah, I've done that where I've invested more. Invested in my bit more and more. That was terrible money. Like, why did we do that? But we've
all done it, and better. And everybody does it. It just feels like it's hitting someone for millions of dollars now.
Yeah. And that's great. I mean, I just don't see they cancel the two events. They have a New Year's event. I don't know how you could be optimistic to even have that New Year's event. I mean, maybe you should be but I don't know how that turns things around. They have a New Year's Eve event coming up, and then that's supposed to turn things around. They apparently are not making any. It doesn't seem like they're making any money off their shows. Ticket sales, just based on whatever we get, seems very low. That can't be paying the bills. Their roster of fighters, except for the few Ali Abdelaziz guys that have the belts, the name fighters keep shrinking and shrinking that are in the promotion. They're not loaded with a ton of name valuable fighters. And I guess there's also questions of how much input Abdelaziz still has in that promotion, even though he technically was supposed to have left a year ago. And is there really a Nevada Athletic Commission investigation going on about that? I'd have my doubts about that.
Right. So this New Year's show. I mean, it looks like it's shaping up to be their best card that they've put on. But I mean, it's New Year's Eve in New York City. I've never experienced New Year's Eve in New York City. I do it in Vegas a lot, and things shut down. I imagine it's close to Times Square where everything's going to shut down. Times Square, I think, is shutting down at 1:30 in the afternoon, and this is a daytime card. But you're competing against the college football playoffs.
Yeah.
So what does that mean right away? You don't get any casuals, none, zero. They're all going to be watching college football. All you're getting is hardcore viewers. That's it. And then for attendance, I mean, are you going to be able to leave? That's the big issue for Vegas, right? If you do anything on New Year's, it ends at like 9 or 10 o'clock at night. You can't leave. You can't go back to your hotel. They're all shut down. This is different in New York, but it might be, I assume it's just going to be so crowded and so packed. People are going to ask themselves, how am I going to be able to get home? Or how am I going to be able to go to wherever I want to go next, right? What do you guys see about this show? What do you think? I mean, it just, even though the card looks good, I have a lot of doubts about it.
The difference in Vegas, too, people that go to Vegas are out-of-towners that go to those shows mostly. And then, so if you're at a show near the Strip and the show ends, you just walk on the Strip. You don't care what's going on. You're just going to walk out and party for the rest of the night. You could possibly pull that off. But in New York, you're not drawing. There's tourists that go to New York for New Year's Eve. They're not going to go there for the World Series of Fighting fights. It's going to be locals. And they're like, am I going to put up with the massive traffic jam to get in and out of the city on New Year's Eve to go see this card? I don't see it happening.
Right.
I just don't. Yeah, it's going to be hard. I mean, in theory, it sounds like a great idea to put it on December 31st in New York, because it's the first time in New York. You have it's a celebration. People, it's going to be on NBC, but like you allude to, you're competing with the college football playoffs. People are going to be off of work or getting ready for New Year's Eve somehow. So it's going to be a hard hit. Spike did it last year with the Rising card, a tape delay, and they did something like 136,000 viewers. And I could only expect maybe you get a little bump because it's NBC and somehow somebody lands on it. But it's in theory a great idea, but practically it probably won't draw as many people. I don't know if they're going to paper the show so they give away free tickets so people just come in before they go on their New Year's Eve thing. You'll probably get hardcore people who want to see MMA, but it's going to be hard because everything's going to be all jammed up for New Year's Eve in New York.
Yeah. The problem with World Series of Fighting too is that there's only hardcores are going to watch them to begin with. It's I am obsessed with seeing Jake Shields fight John Fitch. People laugh at that. That's one of my all-time dream fights because it's two of the two best grapplers and the second best welterweights of the GSP era going at it. But that's not a fight that's going to get wide mainstream appeal or even semi-casual appeal. That fight actually, to me, should be put in the San Jose Bay Area because at least they have fan followings between the two camps. There's a history between fighters. The camps out there makes sense in the Bay Area. It doesn't really make sense in New York. And the World Series Fighting problem is UFC's the brand. Everybody knows the UFC. Bellator's brand probably isn't that good, but Bellator has name fighters. They have Chael Sonnen, they have Tito, and they have Rampage, and they have just a lesser degree King Mo is a star. They have people that the general MMA, the more casual MMA fans know and are going to tune into. World Series of Fighting doesn't have that. They have guys that only hardcore fans are really into right now, and so I don't. And on top of that, you put an event in a place that they're going to be overlooked and overshadowed by everything else going on at that date. To me, it's a recipe for disaster. I guess it's the only thing better is at least it's not on the same day of the New York card, the UFC 205, which was the previous one, but they at least canceled. They're going to go up against that. Which,
it feels like they're doing it. I mean, yeah, it feels like they're doing it just because they're trying to say they're at Madison Square Garden, even though it's a theater. It feels like they're trying to build the prestige, and then you have to ask yourself, why are they trying to build the prestige? It doesn't seem like there's any way in hell that they're going to make this thing profitable, even this show, even though I personally love the card. Justin Gaethje fighting anyone, I'll watch. Like you said, Shields and Fitch, awesome. Marlon Moraes, I don't remember who he's fighting, but I love watching him. I'll watch him fight almost anybody too. But it doesn't seem like they're going to be making money off of it. So why would they be trying to build the prestige of it? Let's think here.
I had a thought too. World Series of Fighting kind of had a bad luck that they started when they did. They would have been better off starting their promotion now, basically, than when they did. When they started, there was no talent available. Strikeforce had bought, UFC had bought Strikeforce, and basically no one was available on the market. No one was testing the free agent market. So they were making do with hodgepodge fighters and, trying to see who they could get and guys that have been cut. But nowadays, if they had started with the money they spent back then and launched a promotion with that same money today, they might have a shot because there's guys willing to test the market now. They could have gone out and said, okay, we're gonna snatch 4 or 5 name guys and pick some guys up, and we're gonna spend this $10 million that we sunk in and lost in the company. Now it actually would do some good. So it's unfortunate where they spent the money when they did, when later, but there was probably a better chance to make a better promotion a few years later.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Maybe they can get a do-over. So.
Sorry, world. We'd like our money back if you don't mind. Oops. All right, well, that's all the time we have for today. On behalf of John Nash and Jason Cruz, I'm Paul Gift, reminding you keep doing business as usual. We'll catch you next time.